All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome. Thank you for coming, and thank you for taking time to learn about bats, bat conservation, and what we've got in the works cooking for 2026 that hopefully you all will be able to participate in. So we're recording this, and this will be made available to everybody afterwards as well. We'll be able to send a message out with like how we're going to share it with everybody afterwards. So let's get started. All right. So my name is Ryan, and I'm with Gotham Bat Conservancy. I am a wearer of many hats at Gotham Bat Conservancy, and we have a variety of different programs and things that we do in furthering our mission of bat conservation and bolstering bat populations in our area. So this is kind of like a little glimpse into some of the stuff that we've got going on. We've got public programming where we do bat walks, sometimes at mostly at night and sometimes during the day when we're looking for potential bat habitats to be exploring at night. We have internships with high school students as well as like college and some graduate students. And we do acoustic research, which is a big part of what we do, and we're going to talk a bit about that later on. And we also have what we call the Bat Sanctuary Program, where we provide materials to do habitat restoration and also provide supplemental habitat like these bat houses to areas that can make use of them to like help us with our programming and to bring bat conservation into their specific place and programming. So we work a lot with the New York City Parks Department, for example. So who we are, like I said, Gotham Bat Conservancy. We were officially founded in 2022, and we did so in response to the endemic of white nose syndrome, which is something that I feel like many people may have heard of, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, and the wider destruction of bat habitats and the impact that that's had on bats and many other wildlife. So today, what we are going to talk about are some just basics about bats, getting to know the different bats that are in our area in the Northeast. We're going to talk about bat ecology, the role that bats play in ecosystems, threats to bats like white nose syndrome and habitat loss and kind of what that looks like. And we're going to talk about bat acoustics and how that plays a significant role in bats conservation and like our strategy for bat conservation and how you can become involved with us and doing the work that we do in order to conserve bats. Um, Hopefully, after this is finished, we'll have a better understanding of why bats are so vital to our ecosystems, be able to identify bats that are in our areas that you may see. Usually at the beginning and end of bat season is when we get lots of bat sightings of bats on the grounds or on trees or kind of all over the place and in weird places. We'll be able to recognize the key threats to that are impacting bat populations. We'll learn how scientists and other conservationists are studying and protecting bats, and we'll learn about the simple actions that we can take as individuals that will support bat conservation, and also how you can get involved with us in a more systemic way. So let's talk a little bit about bats. This, I'm going to say, is one of my favorite bat images of the mama eastern red bat and the two babies. Um, so bats are part of the order Chiroptera, and this its nomenclature is broken down into chiro, meaning hand, like chiropractor, and ptera, meaning wing, like pterodactyl. And it literally means hand wing. And so that you can see below translates into compared to the anatomy of a human arm and hand, bats share all of the same bones. So their wings are quite literally hands. They are hand wings with the thin like membranous the thin membrane that's between each one of their like fingers, quote unquote, and extends down to their feet. So just think of like your finger bones super extended with a membrane in between connecting to your feet, and then you too can have a hand wing. And our little note at the bottom is to keep in mind that bats, although small and mammals, are not rodents. But they are, like I said, mammals. They are, in fact, the only mammals that are capable of true flight, as in they are self-powered flyers, like birds. So there are other mammals like flying squirrels and sugar gliders that are capable of like mimicking flight by gliding, but bats are the only mammals that are capable of true flight. They live for about 20 years, which is quite a long period of time for a mammal of their size. When you think about like the lifespan of rodents, they are very short lifespans in comparison. In the wild and in captivity, bats have been observed as living up to 40 years, which is pretty remarkable. And part of their life cycle is the birth cycle, which for bats um, is quite small, as like their litters are quite small, and usually giving birth to only one pup every year, with the occasional set of twins, like this mama eastern red bat. So, bats have evolved approximately like 52 million years ago. So, the evolution of bats is something that happened quite a while ago, transitioning from the evolutionary adaptation or advantage of being able to uh, hunt prey that was not already being targeted by other animals. So early fossils show the transition to powered flight. So, like in the fossil record, we can see these different species of animals that progressively grew the traits, the physical traits that enabled them to go from land to gliding to true powered flight. And Chiroptera is one of the most evolutionary distinct mammal orders in that they evolved in a manner that's very unique to just them. Bats have very few natural predators, which is something that's really interesting and is very unique in that their primary threats are from disease, like white nose syndrome, which we'll get into more specifics with later. But they do have some natural predators, such as owls, snakes, and hawks, and like other raptors and birds of prey are going to predate bats. Bats are also very clean. They spend a lot of time grooming themselves, similar to like how cats are, very conscientious of their cleanliness and like the routines that they have in grooming themselves. They will do that often, and they will also do it to each other. So they are inherently very clean animals, and their grooming helps in the restriction of parasites being like a significant issue of them because they maintain a certain standard of cleanliness, let's say. Their physiology and health. Bats are really interesting when it comes to their health and their physiology. So they have super strong immune modulation systems. And what does that mean? So they have unique components to their immune systems that help them regulate how they respond to disease. So, for example, a human or other mammal might get a bacterial infection, which would cause inflammation. And in bats that are afflicted with the same um, diseases can control that type of a response so that they don't have any inflammation when it's not advantageous to have it, like, say, in order to conserve energy for flight, and then go into a different state during the day where they're at rest, where they can allow those sort of like immune system responses to happen. Um, they also have unique metabolic adaptations that are for the ability to fly. And what this looks like is a significant how do I want to say this? They have the ability to significantly alter their, for example, circulatory system. So their heartbeats will be able to go from a much lower heart rate to almost 10 times as much in order to maintain flight because it's very energetically exhausting and requires a very high metabolism, whereas at rest, they don't need to have that same level of metabolic rate. So they have these like adaptations that allow them to control lots of these different aspects about their bodies in order to maintain flight. They also have a biological resistance to a lot of diseases because of like we I mentioned their like immune modulation system. So they have a resilience to a lot of diseases that might be fatal or significantly inhibiting during like the infection for other animals. But in bats, we see that they're much more capable of being resilient to those things and living through them and surviving through them without significant impacts on their behavior or their being. And however, they are very sensitive to disturbances to these patterns and systems that they have in order to do these things, which we'll talk about. Social behaviors. So bats, like many other mammals, are very, very social. Many species of bats are likely to roost in large colonies. I think, like when people think about like bat colonies in caves and such, like I just recently watched some of the Batman movies not too long ago, and inside the caves, it's like depicted as like these big colonies of like thousands and thousands of bats. That is one way that they'll roost, are in these very large colonies. And others are going to prefer to roost in much smaller colonies. So in our area, we have like this kind of mixture of smaller colonial groups and some that prefer much larger groups that have gotten much smaller because of some of the things we'll talk about later. They have complex communication skills, including different types of calls and tactile cues. So they'll be able to uh, utilize their calls, voices, I guess, is the best way to say that, to be able to communicate frustration, and like mating and other like tactile cues to like initiate those. And then one of the more interesting like vocalizations between bats is the mother and pup situation, where mother bats and pups can recognize each other through unique calls, similar to, I guess, what we would like think of as names, where a a mother will be able to make this unique call to the baby pup in any of these larger maternal colonies and be able to like locate her in the big group, and that the pup will be able to do the same thing and make this unique call so that they can hear each other and they can find each other in these big groups. They also have a lot of cooperative behaviors, and I like to think of like babysitting being one of the big ones. So it's not uncommon for groups of female bats that are raising young to live together during like the active seasons and collaboratively take care of the pups by defending them or watching as some of them are going to leave to go and hunt and like taking turns and things of that nature of watching over them, which is really, really cool to see. So, a couple of really quick things, additional things about bats. So, in the world, like at large, there is newly, very newly, 1,500 different species of bats globally. They're ubiquitous, so they're on all continents except for Antarctica. There are recently about 47 species of bats in the United States. Um, in our area of the country in the Northeast, there are 9 species of bats. And in this region, bats are insectivores. There are other types of bats that partake in different diets, like nectar, fruits, some other animals. Blood is one of them. But in this area of the world, we have insectivorous bats, so they just eat bugs. And in our area, we have these two like clades of bats that I like uh, to think of them as like two distinct groups. And this is a pairing of their behaviors and how they operate. And these are the tree bats and cave bats. Some of the fun myths about bats that I like to kind of throw out there, and when we get into like the Q&A question portion of everything, we'll be able to kind of like touch on these. But I like to touch on them in general, just to kind of like answer some of the FAQs right from the bat. The first myth is the common saying that bats are blind. Bats are not blind. They do use echolocation, but that is like an assistive mechanism. So bats are capable of seeing, and they can see quite well, but they're nocturnal. They operate at night, where even if you can see, it is difficult to see at night. And so having this extra tool helps them function at like a very high capacity in being able to navigate their space and to successfully hunt prey. Another myth is that all bats drink blood. And while there are some bats in the world that do consume blood as like a nutrition source, there are 3 species of bats that are vampiric, and they are all in like Central and South America is where they're located, and they feed predominantly on cattle. And that's kind of what that looks like. And get into more specifics about that later. But yes, very few bats actually drink blood. And in this area, 0 bats drink blood. Another myth is that bats will get stuck in your hair. I think this is something, I don't know when this started being a thing, but I distinctively remember this being something I heard very frequently when I was younger. Um, and this is not I mean, it's not true, and I think it comes from instances of when bats are found in people's homes and they are seeing behaviors like swooping in towards the center of the room and interpreting that as like they're coming at you or coming after you, and like you know the highest part of you is your head. And I think that somewhere in all of there is where this kind of came from. And like taking a step back from everything and thinking about like the scenario of like what is this really if a bat is in your home and swooping around. Bats are capable of flight, but they are not super adept at taking flight from the ground. So, like, gravity is a good helper in helping them, like, keep their momentum and be able to maintain flight. So, in a small place like a home that usually has furniture, like, lining the outsides, and humans are more likely to be towards the middle of the room, a bat's going to make use of the corners of the room to get to the height, and then the clearer part of the room in the middle to move and it's small, so they're just kind of dipping and diving around, and humans just happen to be in the center of those spaces. So it could look like they're, attacking you or intentionally flying at you, but it's truly just trying to maintain flight and finding a means of getting away from you. The last little myth that I want to talk about is that bats spread rabies widely, which is a very untrue. That's spreading rabies. The transmission of rabies to humans from bats is a remarkably rare event. And in North America, for example, it happens approximately one time a year. So it's very, 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 very small. So this is fun. We're gonna look at all the different types of species that we have of bats, to get like a kind of like a nice up close and personal look at what they look like and how different and unique all of them really are, which is very fun to me. So each one of these is going to have like in this upper corner, there's like a little cave or a little tree to indicate which clade that they belong to. So this is the silver-haired bat. It is a tree bat, and this species, I mean, all bat species have very non-creative names. So this is a silver-haired bat. It has silver hair. Um, they're much darker. So they're these like dark browns, blacks, and the tips of their hair are like a silvery. They have like these really cute, like rounded ears and like a piggy flattened nose. I like to think of lots of images of them, like show this like little flat nose, and I very much enjoy that. So these guys, like I said, these are tree bats, which we'll get into the difference between the two more specifically in a little bit. This is the big brown bat. This is probably, if you've encountered bats outside, one of the bats that you've most likely seen. They come out earlier, like around dusk, so they're very easily spotted. They're very visible, and they're bigger. So they have like a larger body with broader wings. They're also, I mean, they're all quite small. So large, think about like a quarter versus a dime, like that kind of large in comparison. Um, they have like a shinier brown fur. It's like a lighter color underneath them, and these are cave bats, so they are found, and we'll learn a little bit more why in a bit, but they are very common to be found like in the eaves of buildings, in barns, other like structures similar to that, and will make use of bat boxes. This is the northern long-eared bat. It is a bat with long ears that is in the northern part of the United States. Like I said, not super creative names. But they have very like distinctively long ears that extend past their nose. Like you can see in this image on the other of the bat hanging, that the ears are going to go past the nose, which is like one of the distinctive like identifying characteristics of them because they do look very similar to some of the other bats. They have like a very slender body, like a very as opposed to being very like, I don't want to say like corpulent, but kind of like fluffier. They're very like slender. Um they have like a lighter brown fur, and these bats often they're gonna live in more like densely forested areas, and like they're cave bats, so they're gonna like the spookier parts of trees, like little cavities and such. Little brown bats, these are also bats that if you've seen them outside, or if you've seen bats outside, you've probably also seen these. At one point, they were the most common bat in North America until recent events. But these guys have a, they have like a shorter brown fur, like the big brown bat, but they're smaller. They also have like a blunter nose in comparison, so It's like a little bit more of like a smoosh nose, like the silver, excuse me, like the silver hair bat. And these guys are also cave bats, so they're gonna like these similar kinds of structures as like the northern or the excuse me, the big brown bat. So like the eaves of buildings, attics in your like the attic of a house, the window coverings, things like that. And yeah, so they're very similar. Eastern red bats. These are tree bats, and they are they're the uncreativeness of their name. They are a reddish color and are found east of in the eastern United States. So these guys are they're like reddish and orange. Females usually have like more vibrance to them. Um, they have a very furry tail. So like they have this membrane that's like between their feet that connects their feet to like their tail and make this little like cape between their little legs. And they have like a particularly furry one. It comes in handy for like navigating very quickly, being able to stop and stand, change directions very fast. Um, these are bats that are going to live, since they're tree bats, they prefer living in places like amongst like the foliage and trees. And I often tell people they do like pine trees quite a lot, and are pretty much like pine cone sized. And I like to tell people that like during the day when you're looking at pine trees during the summer, it wouldn't be weird to look at a cluster of pine cones closer and see that it might not actually be pine cones, which is very fun. The Indiana bat, similar to like the other cave bats, it has like a much more like muted brown kind of a color going on, like a gray brown kind of a thing. Its face though is a bit more pink, like underneath, and has a keeled calcar, which is like a little spur on like the tail membrane, which is more noticeable than other bats that are going to look similar to this one. So it's like one of the key like identifiers when you're trying to like speciate what you're looking at. These bats are very fond of forest edges and caves. So that's kind of like the type of place that we would expect to find these during the summer. These ones are currently listed as an endangered species in the United States. Um, there are two. This is one of the two of them. The next is the hoary bat. This is a tree bat and looks, like I just mentioned that like the cave bats are a little bit more dull or and like brownish, and the tree bats tend to be like a little bit more vibrant. So these guys are in that kind of little category. They're more vibrant. They're very I like to think of them as very fluffy because they have this like really thick fur. They remind me of chinchillas, quite frankly. Like their fur density is very reminiscent of that. And like the shape that it kind of gives them when you're looking at them like in the face. Um, so they have like a very like yellowy, tannish brown kind of a face and rounded ears, not super round like the silver hair bat, but they have like rounded ears as opposed to coming to a point. And these bats, they like to kind of hang out by themselves in like pretty small numbers. And these are one of the most widespread US bats. So you're going to find these pretty much everywhere, including Hawaii. The eastern small-footed bat or small-footed myotis. I love this bat because it's so tiny. All of these bats are they're micro bats, so they're all quite small, but like the size of the thumbnail in this image and like the bat, it's so tiny. It's so cute. So yeah, they have like super tiny bodies. They got tiny feet, hence the name. Um, but their faces are very like mask-like. So they have like a very dark visage. And they have that they're cave bats, so they have this like glossy brown, more brown fur. These guys are really they like these like rocky places, so like cliffs, like in a more like man-made environment, like bridges, things like that. So like pretty like rugged or like rigid structures. I love these guys. And then we have the tricolored bat. So this bat is named because it has on its like strands of hair three different colors. So it has like fur that it has three different colors. It like gradiates out. Um, they are they similarly to the Indiana bat, they have like a pinkish kind of like tone to their skin, which is like more exposed at their face and on their forearms. They have like a very, you can see in the center picture, like a very strong contrast between the bony areas of their wings and the membranes. Um, these are cave bats, and they're gonna prefer these like cavernous kinds of structures, but they do also live like in the foliage of trees during like the summer months here. Um, these are one of the earlier bats to show up too. So it's not uncommon for us to see these in like the first wave of bats that kind of comes out like around dusk, a little bit after dusk. And those are our bats, all nine of them. So we have three tree bats and six cave bats. It took me a second. We have nine altogether in this area. So we're going to talk a little bit about their ecology. And this is going to like start to get into like understanding the way that they kind of occupy spaces and then how they operate so that we can understand like how to effectively conserve them. So bats do what's called roosting, where they're going to, spend their inactive time. And these during the summer months when they're active are going to be in trees and cavernous structures. And this is like natural and man-made. So it's why it's not super uncommon to see lots and lots of cave bats in city environments and the suburbs. Um, they also make use of forage habitats. So they have areas where they're going to rest during the day, where they're going to raise their young, and they'll do a little bit of hunting in that area. And then there's foraging habitats where they're predominantly going to be active and looking for food. And this is going to be water bodies, like rivers, lakes, ponds. Ponds are a big one. All of them really are, but freshwater bodies, meadows, and canopy breaks. Depending on the species, there's like a little bit in preference between all these, but these are the forage areas that they're really going to be. You're going to find them in that like active hunting mode. Then we have like maternal roosts, or these are areas where bats are going to be raising their young together in smaller groups, some larger, but it varies. We'll get into like, well, I guess this is a great time to talk about this. So site fidelity is this unique behavior that bats have where once they have identified an area that is safe and provides them everything that they need to survive, like a comfortable amount of food, a good safe place to roost, to rest. They will return back to these areas year after year. So these areas that bats occupy are super important because the bats that you see this year in an area are going to be the bats that are there again the following year and their offspring. Um, so these areas, especially maternal roosts, are super important because they're going to keep returning to these areas in order to reproduce and to raise their young. And then in the winter months, we have the hibernacula. So some of these bats are gonna hibernate, but not all of them, which we'll get to in a second. But the takeaway from this is that during hibernation, These areas, which are caves, abandoned mines, things like that, are where bats are going to go to hibernate for the winter when food is much more scarce, and or not available entirely. And that is like a significant portion of like bats' life cycles in this part of this part of the country and world. So, but not all of them do it. So this is just like bats kind of have like preferences for different types of kinds of places, like the spookier parts of trees or to live amongst like the foliage. They also have preferences for what types of trees that they're going to be making use of during the summer months. In this pie chart is the different type, the genera of trees that bats roost in the eastern United States. So the most important, you can see on this pie chart that like more than just over 75% of the types of trees that bats are roosting in are in one of these five categories. In our area in like the north, four of them are super, super common and important. And those are the oaks, pines, maples, and hickories. And then tupelos are like a little bit further south, but also make up like a significant percentage of occupancy for bats in this part of the part of the country. So these trees particularly are very, very important in the ecology of bats and like where we're going to find them, where we're going to see them spending a lot of time in the summer, where they're going to be raising their young very, very often, and are therefore very important things to conserve. So to look at how, like cave bats and tree bats are kind of functioning. Trees in general are super important for bat like conservation and for them to be able to like live their lives successfully. And depending on which one of these like clades of bats they're in, kind of dictates their preference for like where in the tree they're actually going to prefer to roost. So cave bats are the bats that are going to be like hibernating in caves in the winter. And because of this, they like these like I said, like spookier, quote unquote, spookier parts of trees. So you have like your cavernous parts of trees, like holes, knots, things like that. And then also like the perforations in the bark where it's lifting away from the tree because it's part of how the tree functions, like shagbark hickory trees, for example, or trees that are dead or dying. Like in these images, we can see that these trees are, like not doing the best, but that's ideal for these bats, where they have these little craggy places to kind of tuck themselves away and be comfortable. These are very reminiscent of these tiny, tight environments that we find in bat houses that we use to replicate that kind of a vibe for them. So cave bats are the bats that are going to make use of bat houses, like those types of like supplemental habitats, because they mimic these like cool little tiny places that they can kind of tuck together in little groups. And then tree bats, unlike cave bats, don't hibernate. They actually fly south for the winter. So they have like a very wide range. So they're going to be up here in this part of the country during the summer, and then they're going to fly south, like all the way down to like even down into like the Gulf from this area, that part of the country, like Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Florida, and that's where they're going to go during the winter. So that because they don't make use of these like craggy kind of places in their like phenology in their life cycles, they are more of the like free hangers. So they're hanging out kind of like in the foliage of the trees. They have like the more stereotypical kind of bat silhouette, like this hoary bat that's just kind of free hanging from the branches. And they'll either group together in these little groups or, hang out by themselves or near each other. But they'll occupy those parts of the trees and are kind of sometimes visible during the day if you have like a really good eye and a really good set of binoculars. Um, so in addition to the importance for bats directly, these trees are also important to bats' food sources, which includes lots of different insects. And one of the big important groups of insects during the summer months for bats includes Lepidoptera. So, like you can see, all of these different tree genera are super important for bats as far as their occupancy, but they also are host to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of different types of like moths and butterflies and different insects that bats are going to hunt as a food source. So they're important in that sense as well. Speaking of important, why are bats important? Why should we care about bats other than like their inherent value as living things? So bats play very, very significant roles in the environments that they occupy. Um, Something that's not on here that I'm actually going to start with is their role in cave ecology. Because they are an animal that exits the caves and then comes back into the caves, they are a significant source of the energy that's brought into caves via droppings, so guano. So they'll consume food outside of caves and they'll bring energy into the caves by making droppings and being able to like contribute to the energy cycle for other life inside of these caves, which is really cool. Um, Also, insect control. So this is a big one. So as far as the insect control, aside from like the human component to it, they are a natural pressure on insect populations. So their presence keeps insect populations at bay. Kind of like in comparison to how I think of it as like the what is it called? The long-tailed white deer, that their populations have gotten out of control because of the loss of their predators, wolves and other like carnivores that they are able to damage like environments by like overgrazing and interfering with like tree succession and like life cycle of trees and things like that and other plants. And um, so it's kind of like that where like without the pressure of bats, like insect populations can kind of get that out of control kind of a thing. Um, so thinking of it through like the human lens and like the economic lens, they play like a significant portion role in insect control, and that translates to pest control and the impacts it has on food security and our like food systems. So in agriculture, other in addition to Lepidoptera, like moths and butterflies, other groups of insects that they're going to consume are like beetles and like other pest insects to like the agricultural industry. And like the calculated value of like what they save U.S. agriculture annually is $23 billion, which is like a very significant loss prevention. From the like human health lens, bats, because they are a pressure on insects, are a pressure on insects that carry diseases like mosquitoes. So think of your West Nile virus, East equine encephalitis, things like that, where as bat populations are going down, we're seeing like more occurrences of these like mosquito-borne illnesses in these areas as well. And because of the presence of bats and their role in like the agricultural world, their presence means that we have a reduced um, need for the application of pesticides, which is just kind of like an inherently good thing, a win. In addition to insect control, in other parts of the world, bats are pollinators. So in like the southwest of the United States, where we have agave, bats play like a significant role in pollination. So they're eating the nectar or insects like around the flowers at night, that bloom at night, and they play like a role in pollinating these plants. And there are many species of plants that require um, bats for pollination. So about 300 species of plants rely exclusively on bats for pollination, which is like quite a large number. And as far as foods that impact or plants that impact us, agaves, mangoes, bananas, things like that, avocados, pollinated by bats. Seed dispersal. So there are also in other parts of the world bats that are fruitivorous bats. So they eat fruits. And so they'll carry the fruits around, drop them in different areas and spread their seeds. Or they'll eat them as well as with the fruits, and then they'll pass the seeds like in their droppings and will help in like the dispersal of seeds. So thinking about like in areas of the world where fire plays like a role in forest ecology, and we have um, naturally deforested areas and unnaturally deforested areas. Bats are among the first species that enter into these deforested areas and bring these seeds and start reforesting them. So they're like super important in that cycle. And like I mentioned, they are also just inherently important. They are a significant portion of the mammal population. One in every five species of mammal on Earth is a bat. So that's a pretty big percentage. So why do bats need our help? Why are we conserving bats? What's going on that requires assistance? There's two things, uh, arguably three, that we can talk about. The first is habitat destruction, the second being white nose syndrome, and the third I would throw in there is myths and like misunderstandings about bats. So habitat destruction looks like the like complete destruction, degradation, or fragmentation of a habitat that bats are occupying. So we think about either the destruction of a habitat, like a forest that was there that is removed, like clear cut, taken away, the whole thing is gone. Then we have like fragmented, where we think about like large forested areas with like a big city, say, in between them, or a series of like highways in between them that breaks them into two separate places that aren't easily traversed anymore and aren't really connected anymore. And then like a degraded environment, an area that is like polluted, let's say, with like noise pollution, light pollution, actual pollution, like those are pollution, but like chemical pollution, things like that, and water sources that kill trees and cause like significant changes to the environment and make it unhospitable. So these are human caused habitat issues. And a big contributor to these is the suburban sprawl. So the progressive expansion of environments that are conducive to human preferences, like lawns and highways, transportation and industrial areas, and all of these things that are removing these forested environments that are polluting cave environments, things like that. And in addition to that, the human interest in ecotourism in caves. Something that I've discovered not too long ago is some of the caves that are, in my opinion, very are caves of notoriety because of their role in white nose syndrome. Do how we utilize these spaces is not the best for maintaining their integrity and having a really negative impact on them. There are responsible ways to enjoy these places, and those places absolutely do exist, but how we use them is there is certainly room for improvement. And we're going to actually talk about that when we get into white nose syndrome a little bit more. But yeah, like I said earlier, bats are super vulnerable to disturbances. And so how we use these caves and when we use these caves has a big impact on bats and their ability to use them or their desire to use them, because then they're viewed as safe spaces or not. So, what is white nose syndrome? White nose syndrome is it's a fungal disease. So, it is like spores that will grow this fungus on the more like fleshy parts of a bat, like their muzzle, like their nose, hence the name, but also the membranes of their wings. And even like on their fur, it'll kind of like grow there too when they're hibernating and they go into this like torpid state where the fungus can thrive on them because they're not moving around, they're in a very cold environment, their body temperatures are going down, and it's the perfect environment for a fungus to thrive. The fungus is Pseudogymnoascus destructans. It is not from North America, but is now very widespread in North America. It came from likely Eastern Europe, like Eurasia, that area of the world, and was likely introduced into a cave via this like how we use them. So like ecotourism. The cave that it was I found in or identified in first was in New York State in the Hudson Valley. And since then, in like the mid 2000s, it has spread across the whole entire continent and has truly devastated some species of bats, particularly the cave bats that go into hibernation, um, decreasing their populations by 90% or more, which is like an insane figure to think about. 90% of a population of something being gone in such a short period of time is crazy. The disease itself, how it impacts bats, it itself isn't what kills them. It's the fact that it disturbs their hibernation. And like this consistent disruption to like the hibernation, um, the system of hibernation makes it so that they cannot maintain their fat reserves for the whole winter. Costs a lot of energy to come out of hibernation and be fully active. It's something that only happens a few times naturally during like the cycle of a winter to come out of hibernation and to go into this like torporous state and become partially active to um, like excrete urine, waste, to like nosh on some bugs maybe that are in a cave, things like that, and then go back into this hibernation state. But this constant disturbance and this irritation from this fungus causes them to fully wake up many, many, many times, burning through their fat reserves, and it causes them to starve to death in the winter because there's no food availability. So it is killing bats in that way. But on the plus side, what we're seeing is, or on the positive side, what we're seeing is that these bats populations that have been impacted by white nose syndrome are in this like phase where they're starting to rebound. So areas that have been very heavily hit by white nose syndrome first, like in the eastern United States, because that's kind of where it started. So we're in like a later portion of like the infection cycle. Um, we're seeing the bats that have survived this infection have this really cool genetic trait that allows them to better regulate disturbances to their metabolism so that they can survive the winter more successfully. And that this genetic trait is able to be passed along. So the conservation work that happens is like super, super important because the bats that we're protecting now in this part of the country are mostly the bats that have these genes that are able to like withstand white nose syndrome. So reconnecting populations, bolstering populations is super important. And it's like the beginning of like a little bit of a rebound phase. And it's ultimately by like seeing this like natural selection kind of happening in like super hyperdrive because it all happened so quickly. 2007-ish is when the a disease was identified. So it all happened quite quickly. And then you have like a visual next, actually. Yeah, so this is what it looks like and like the extent of which it can get to. So it kind of starts off like these little speckles that you can kind of see on the wings of this bat, and then it'll spread while they're in hibernation, kind of on initially the muzzle, making that like white nose, and like on like the exposed skin part of their wings. Like some of it you can see is growing on like the ends of their like fur where it's like very moist when they're in hibernation, and the damage can get quite severe and like end up making it so that they actually can't fly anymore by like degrading the membrane of their wings. So it's pretty ugly stuff. So yeah, 2007 in this area of New York is where it was first identified. In 2022, this is how much it's spread. With like the cooler colors being the closer to like the identification of it, and the warmer colors being the more recent discoveries. Um, so it spread very quickly, and this is now 2025. So it's pretty much everywhere in the United States. It is all over Canada and has started its entrance. It's being identified in Mexico as well. So very, very, very widespread, very, very, very quickly, with very, very significant impacts to populations. So bad acoustics, it seems like a very harsh kind of shift, but we're going to start getting into, now that we've talked about like bats, what's impacted them, like how do we help, by what means can we do that, and bat acoustics, being able to listen to bats and how they make sounds, how they communicate, helps in that process. It helps us to like inform conservation, so it's very, very important stuff. It's very cool stuff too. It's very fun. So, what are bat bioacoustics? What is it? So, it's the study of the sounds that they make. So, like bio being like the biological, acoustics, the sounds that they make. So, they'll make different types of sounds, echolocation, and like other types of like social calls. Um, and what we do is we use specialized equipment in order to like detect these different ultrasonic sounds that bats are putting out there. And we can use that information to help us monitor like their presence, what they're doing in those areas, and like how those areas are being used based on the types of sounds they're making. So, whoops. Why do they echolocate? So like I said, they make this ultrasonic sound, and they use it for a very specific purpose, and one of which is to navigate in darkness. Like I said, bats aren't blind, but they do operate predominantly at night when it is dark. So it helps them to be able to navigate. Um, it also helps them to follow and keep tracking fast-moving insects. So like thinking about like how fast something like a moth can fly and how kind of erratic it can fly. Things like mosquitoes and like beetles and spotted lanternflies, things like that, and like how they're able to move quickly and not so quickly, but it helps in being able to keep focus on them and to know where they are in like a very quick moving environment. It helps to identify entrances into different areas, like the roost that they're using. They can use it to see like the surfaces of the water, little breaks in cluttered parts of forests, and like where not to crash into, things like that. So it's really, really important for navigation and identifying food sources, or and being able to kind of like lock in on them. Some species also use social calls for communication. So one of the things that we've kind of done recently is, you see it on there. One of the things that we've kind of done recently is while we're out and we have a group of bats kind of like in our area that's kind of staying in our area because there's lots of bugs, um, we'll turn off all of the like playback from everything, and you can hear the social calls that they're making to each other. And those are actually audible with the human ear, and it sounds very like it sounds very silly and fun. But they also will use like different vocalizations to communicate with each other, and not just for this like navigation stuff. So like how does echolocation work? So like I said, it's like an ultrasonic sound. It's like a pulse that they put out that is a very high frequency, higher than that than we can hear as humans. So it's above that like 20-ish kilohertz area of sound frequency that we can't hear. And the sound pulse that they put out is going to bounce off stuff and come back as like as an echo. And they are able to, with this, create like this map of their surroundings really, really quickly. So by putting these sounds out and it all happens like pretty quickly, they're able to create and maintain this really, really vivid understanding of their surroundings very, very quickly. And then in the process of like while they're using echolocation, the structure of like the sounds that they're using is going to change based on what they're doing. And you can think of it like searching, approaching, and then what's called like a feeding buzz. So they're going to put out this like search call, which is just a repetitive, just pulse of seeing what's out there. So just kind of maintain a map of the area for themselves. And then when it becomes more important to, I've found something and I need to start honing in on it, they'll approach. So the sound will pick up in frequency and maybe some of the other characteristics. And then we'll get to this thing that's called the feeding buzz, where they are locked in, they are approaching and very, very quickly making these sounds to like keep eyes on it as they're getting very, very close to it so that they can maintain that accuracy and then snag it and then go back to the search. It actually sounds really, really interesting to listen to, and we hear it all of the time, which is it's really fun to listen to. Um, so when we do all these recordings, we don't just listen to them, but we can visualize them. So when we turn these sounds into visuals, it's called a spectrogram. So we can see what the sound looks like on on like a chart. And the x-axis, the bottom line, is going to be the time in milliseconds. And then the y-axis is going to be the frequency, so the kilohertz of the sound. The brightness on the spectrogram is showing us like the energy and intensity of the sound. And tying a lot of these different things together, we can see the different species producing very distinct sounds. So like the frequency maximum, the duration of the call, the harmonics of the call, and all these other things that are very, very unique to each species based on their biology and what they are hunting, and how they just sound, similar to how humans all speak, but all sound very, very different. Um, Similar to that. So we can use these differentiations in the calls that species make in order to identify what species it is and what behaviors that they're like exhibiting. Like the visualization of, for example, the are they searching? Or are they feeding? Are we seeing a lot of these feeding buzzes and a lot of these other types of calls? Um, are they all not ultrasonic calls? Are we hearing lots of like lower frequency calls that are social calls and like what's happening in those kinds of spaces? So we can use it to identify what species of bats there are and have like a pretty good understanding of like what they're doing in these spaces. So, like I said, each species has like a unique bunch of like characteristics and frequencies to help classify them. Um, Something that we like take into consideration are these things like clutter effects, call variability, and call overlap. So when we're speciating things, we're comparing calls to documented types of calls from that species. And there is call variability. So there is like a degree of variation between those. So we have like a little bits of like windows we're operating in where there's like a little bit of overlap. So there's some like statistical probability kind of involved in all of this to you know identify them as this is confidently this species versus this species. Um, and so yeah, um, we use like automated tools to do this. So we can like program software to recognize specific characteristics and tell us what species it most likely is based on that. But We still have to go through and like quality control all of that data. So we're making sure that it is accurate. So we'll manually review either entire data sets if they're not ridiculously huge, or we'll do like samples of the data sets to get like a sense of the overall accuracy of the data set at large. If like because data sets can include tens of thousands of individual calls. So it would take a crazy amount of time to manually review everything. So we kind of go through it in that way. And the reason that it's super important is that because we can do these types of things, we can detect and monitor like threatened species, endangered species, and cryptic species, the ones that are more difficult to like visualize or catch in like a mist net situation where you're capturing them and like visually identifying species with your eyes. So it makes this pro it's also less invasive. You don't have to capture them. There's no risk of like injury. So it's really cool stuff. So, looking at these two different spectrograms from two different bat species, what are the types of differences that like we can see? And like the first thing that I'm seeing and looking at is the frequency. The spectrogram on the right has like a much higher frequency. It's between like 42-ish kilohertz to about like 72-ish kilohertz, versus on the left we're at like a 40 like 36 to 46 kilohertz. The duration is also different. So the one on the right is a much shorter call. It's like much more compound. And the other is like a much longer call. So it's stretched out a little bit longer. And when we look at these, in addition to the over time, how do I want to say this? You kind of get like an eye for it, I guess, is the best way to say that you can kind of look at it and tell whether it's like a Myotis species, like a very particular group, like cluster of different bat species, like the little brown bat, the Indiana bat, the northern long-eared bat, if it's like in that kind of area, or if it's one of the other ones that's more likely to have like a lower frequency call, which is helpful in like real-time interpretation of data that if you're seeing something that doesn't make sense based on like what you're kind of like experiencing in real time. So it's in addition to like the data on like a table, the visualization of this also really, really helps in being able to like look at them and kind of like come up with calculate your like confidence levels in what bat species you're listening to. So how do we apply all of this stuff to conservation? What we're able to do with this information is we can monitor population trends. So, like, where are specific species of bats during specific times of the year? Like, what are their movements? Um, are they moving into new areas? Are they moving further south? Are they moving further north? Are they finding other areas to find food? Things of that nature. We can also assess the habitats and the quality of the habitats and the activity levels in those areas. So, are they improving? Are we seeing more species diversity? Are we seeing more individuals in certain areas, or are we seeing less of them? Um, we can also evaluate the impacts of wind energy, which is like a super big one, because wind energy does have a significant impact on bats. And being able to like study that is very, very important, and coming up with and evaluating conservation strategies of how are we deterring, mitigating those impacts, decreasing them, and ultimately, ideally, eliminating them when we can. We can also evaluate the impact of urbanization. So areas that are being studied that are becoming more developed, and that are following certain sort of like conservation strategies. Like is that working? We can also use it to study the white nose recovery. So are we seeing these populations of bats in areas where white nose syndrome has been a significant issue? Are we seeing a rebound? Are we seeing populations moving around, spreading genetics, all of those things? So we have like a wide array of applications for conservation that we can use this strategy of listening. And for example, some of the detections in New York City of different bat species that we've had pretty regularly are some of these. The At all of the sites that we kind of initially did some monitoring at, we saw big brown bats, silver hair bats, hoary bats, and eastern red bats. So these guys in New York City, we find everywhere that we have thus far monitored. And in addition to those, some of the species of interest that are worth highlighting are the little brown bat and the tricolor bat that we found in, or that we detected in Staten Island, Queens, the little brown bat in Brooklyn, and even in Manhattan. These are important because they are in the process of the endangered species listing. So they're on their way through the legal system of being formally listed as endangered species because of their significant drop in population. The other is the detection of a northern long-eared bat in the Bronx is very interesting because, like the Indiana bat that I mentioned earlier, the northern long-eared bat is the other endangered species that we have in the Northeast. So this bunch of detections that we've had has spurred a very big interest in uh, learning a lot about the population of bats that we have in New York City, which we'll get to momentarily, I think. So bat conservation. So what are we doing? How can we do stuff to help bats? So small things that we can do on like the individual level when we can is to plant native. So the night blooming species that attract nocturnal bats, but also the trees. Like we said, trees are a super important part of bat life cycles. So, and their like behavior and how they live. So those five different genera of trees are very, very important, and making sure that there are enough of them and there are enough of them living full life cycles is really, really important. Something else that we can do is install bat houses where natural habitat is limited for a variety of reasons. In New York City, it's not super easy to replicate an old growth forest environment, but we can replicate some of the spaces that those environments have in them that bats can make use of with bat houses. We can also install, like I said, with native planting, we can create these forage habitats where bats are going to be able to like find food. We can also reduce the pesticides that we use. The big one would be insect foggers and how that has like a significant impact on like the pollution of an area and like the toxicity that it can introduce into these vulnerable populations of bats and cause all kinds of like health issues. We can protect roosts. And what this looks like is if there is a dead tree, like a tree snag, we call them, someplace where it's safe and not like in any sort of immediate danger of falling on people, leave it and let it be a place for bats to make use of. We can also avoid disturbing caves, not necessarily by completely avoiding them and not going into them at all, but being mindful. Of when you're going in caves. Is it during a period of time where bats are most likely to be occupying them? Is it the winter? Or is it the summer when they're not occupying them? And so there's like the physical disturbance, but also thinking about like the ecological disturbance. So thinking about like cave hygiene, making sure that you're taking care of and sanitizing the gear that you bring into one place before you bring it into another place. Since that's essentially how white nose syndrome, that fungus got here, was through that kind of cross-contamination. That's a good like way to mitigate that by the like cave hygiene, sanitizing stuff before entering into a new environment so you're not like cross-contaminating. Then we have like things like light pollution and being conscientious of like your impact on the night sky, and keeping your outdoor lights off or like at least shielded so it's not a like a full like emission of light, but just like kind of concentrated where you need it to be, um, so that you can see at night where you're going, like upstairs, things like that, to be more like targeted so that we can preserve areas of the sky as dark and able for bats to kind of operate the way that they need to. We can also talk about bats. Like I said, the other kind of like unsung negative impact on bats is a lot of misinformation and a lot of also just lack of um, knowing where to be able to like put your efforts to have an impact. So sharing what you learned about bats and really like helping to create like connections to bats, and like demystify and de like vampire and horror movie them is actually really, really important because like in our experience, we find often that people are very afraid of bats. And that leads to things like exterminators and things like that. You've heard like a lot of horror stories, like people burning down barns because there were bats inside of them after they sealed it because they didn't want them there anymore. And some pretty horrific stuff. So, you know, spreading a lot of this like awareness and like these truths about bats is also super important. And images also are very important too. The like pointy, spooky images of bats are like hyper utilized in a very intentional way of like this is a scary image when they're actually quite there are a lot of quite cute images of bats out there. And there's more to anyone than just like a picture of them on a grumpy day because someone's poking and prodding them to try and get a picture of them. Other ways that you can get involved in conservation of bats is with us. So, Gotham Bat Conservancy, we do have like a volunteer program that is expanding pretty significantly this coming year in 2026. We are bringing in volunteers that are going to help with the acoustics to do a lot of the work that goes into bat monitoring, like putting out gear, changing batteries of gear, changing SD cards, downloading data, things of that nature. Um, Communications, like we have like newsletters and things like that like where we love having people like contribute to with bat stories, like pictures, images, videos, things of that nature. Restoration projects where we do like tree planting, forage habitat restorations, things like that. We have a lot of events and a lot of research stuff coming up next year that we will certainly need help with. Um, you can also join some of our workshops. We have workshops on like how to build and hang your bat box to like maximize the your chances of occupancy and getting like a group of bats to like live in your area because of their need potentially. Um, we also are having workshops on acoustic monitoring, like how to do it, more in-depth, hands-on, putting things out as part of our just individual workshops, but also as part of our like training to be able to participate in the acoustic monitoring program, like a little bit more significantly, and urban ecology skills. So, like habitat assessments and speciating trees and all of those kinds of fun skills that are important for this type of like conservation work. And then participate in protecting habitats. So, we have a bat sanctuary program where we provide a lot of these materials for free to different like land managers, like parks, um, things of that nature to be able to kind of create and expand places where bats can successfully thrive. And in order to do that, we need help, not just financially, but also financially. But we also need help being able to put these things out there and to be able to make maintenance visits to them and make sure that, that they're in good condition and, are set up and maintained to be able to provide the support that they're intended to. You can also host a program. So you can bring one of us to your school, to your park, or community events, community gardens to talk about bats, to help install any sort of bat house or help plant trees, something like that. Like you can host a program, you can host a fundraiser to help support the work that we do. We love working with other groups to help like raise the funds for the types of things that they might need that we don't directly have right away to help bring like educational programs to places like libraries to animal rescue places, which are few and far between because of the legalities of rescuing bats in New York State, things like that. And you can follow us on social media and share the stuff that we talk about and help amplify our impact on like the in the Northeast about bat conservation and the kinds of things that they're going through and how we can help improve their chances of survival as they face the threats of extinction, which is a bummer. So the big upcoming projects that I've kind of alluded to are the Gotham City project and the Canopy project. So the Gotham City project is what we are calling our big acoustic study of New York City bats. And it's a multiple year study. So we're doing it for 5 years. So we will need help consistently. Um, and we are doing this in the goal of making a seasonal occupancy model for all of the bat species in New York City so that we can know with a uh, scientific degree of confidence what species of bats are in New York City at what times of the year. And we're also doing this to help inform conservation strategies. So, in areas that are interested in participating in our bat sanctuary program, we'll be able to provide a guided and informed means of how we should approach conservation in their area specifically. What types of things do they need? The Canopy Project is a study of the inventory of tree species in the areas that we are studying. So, New York City at large has an extensive inventory of trees that includes street trees and intentionally planted trees, but what it does not have is all of these like natural areas of the city, quote unquote, that we have, these larger green spaces that are more the woods kind of a place. And we don't have that information in those places, and that's a big data gap. So we want to do all of these inventories of these trees to get like a sense of the canopy makeup in these areas of the city so that we can see at some point the correlations between what trees um, are present and what bats are present in certain areas and which trees are not present and which bats are not present in certain areas. So those are our two big upcoming projects that'll be going on for quite a while. And being involved in that is fun, I think, and very, very impactful. So, all in all, I would say that today We covered a ton of stuff, and we're going to get into questions in just a second. Um, so kind of like what we learned about bats. Bats of the Northeast are home to several species of bats, nine, including endangered, currently endangered, and protected species, and some that are on the way to being listed as endangered and therefore protected by law. Green spaces in cities host a lot of these animals. We have them in New York, and we have them in the surrounding areas. We've done acoustic studies in Long Island and New Jersey and Pennsylvania and Connecticut and further upstate New York. And these animals are in these places. We've done studies of parks in Buffalo and Rochester. No, Syracuse and Rochester, and we found threatened species in green spaces in those cities as well. So these places are super important. Um, the habitats, the big takeaway is that these native genera of trees, these five native genera of trees make up 75% of bat roosting habitat in this part of the country. So they're super, super important. So taking into consideration what trees that we're planting for restoration purposes and habitat enhancement can really make a difference. So taking those things into consideration when we're like considering horticultural design, we can incorporate bat conservation into those kinds of activities as well. And then also cave ecosystems, super, super delicate, and it doesn't take going inside of a cave to pollute it. Polluting bodies of water um, has a direct impact on caves that are in the area. So, being mindful of our impact on these ecosystems and ecosystems that are connected to them because they're very, very delicate and easy to damage and very, very difficult to rebound. Um, so yeah, that is my spiel on bad conservation. I would love for everybody to kind of like stay in touch. If you have a desire to participate in any of these types of ways, you can get in touch with us on Instagram. Or you can go on our website and send us a message through we have like a bunch of different ways that you can contact us via like, whatever you're interested in, if you're interested in volunteering or if you just have like general questions, stuff like that. Like you can go on our website and there's lots of different ways to get in touch with us and to like just kind of get more information about, more details about the kinds of things that we talked about today. And then now we can venture into the questions and answer portions of our presentation.